there, welcome to another edition of the Silverbird Selection. As I mentioned in my last video, the last game review I did was the 30th game review in the series so far. That means it's time to look back on the last 10 reviews I've done and compare them to the reviews from ZZap magazine back in the 80s and also the user ratings on Lemon64. So without further ado, let's head over to my computer and do that very thing. Okay, so here I am on my computer. I've got my collection tracking spreadsheet open and I've filtered it down to the last 10 games that I've reviewed. And you should know the drill by now if you've seen the other videos I've done like this one. The idea is that I'm going to go through each game in the order that I reviewed them and have a look at the Lemon 64 page and then go through to the ZZap magazine review of the game and just do a little bit of a comparison between them. So the first game in this batch of 10 that I reviewed was BMX Kids. So let's head over to Lemon 64 and we'll search for BMX Kids. As you can see there, Lemon user score is 6.6 from 46 votes. I gave this 7 out of 10 and we can see the magazine review ZZap gave it 79%. Let's have a quick look at some of the comments from Lemon users. Great little game, played this to death back in the day. Superb game that puts a smile on my face. Nice graphics, funky music and loads of action-packed racing. Presentation is ace, gameplay is just average. So some differences of opinion there as you'd expect. So let's go over and take a look at the ZZap review from zap64.co.uk. As you can see, it's part of their budget test, as you'd expect, being a budget game. And there's another Firebird game there, Eyeball 2, but we're not looking at that today. We're looking at BMX Kids. So we've got a colour screenshot, we've got the review box and a couple of reviewer comments. Well presented game, marred initially by rather frustrating gameplay. I'd pretty much agree with that. The exact method and number of stunts to be carried out is a bit vague, and it's really a matter of trial and error before you can complete the second level. Yeah, that's exactly the experience I had as well. Feel to the delights of BMX racing in this rather simple racing game. Charge along the track, pick up the objects and race for the finish line. Graphically the game is decent, backgrounds appear solid and the sprites are a little messy. Great Rob Hubbard tune on the intro screen. So yeah, I can't really argue with any of those comments there, and it pretty much as I saw it as well. Graphics not too bad, sound was pretty decent, and the playability was a little bit variable. I found it a little bit frustrating and quite hard to progress, although the more you play it the better you do get at it. And their overall score, as I mentioned, was 79%, which is pretty close to my 7 out of 10 to be honest. So not much difference of opinion between myself or the ZZap users, or in fact the Lemon users. So moving on, the next game I reviewed was Scorpio, the Silverbird game from 1988, and I gave that a score of 6.8. The Lemon score 6.1, so again not too far off what I said. An honest shoot 'em up with clear graphics and nice animation. Nice looking game, but just a bit dull. I would agree with that totally. Looked good, but it was a bit of a boring shoot 'em up to be honest. Enemy patterns are too predictable and the gun is a pain to control precisely. Apart from the title screen, the graphics are pretty mediocre. Wouldn't really agree with that. I think mediocre is a bit harsh. I thought the graphics were pretty decent for a Commodore 64 shoot 'em up and very representative of the R-Type style graphics. There they are, in case you've forgotten about them. So let's move on to the ZZap score. Again, pretty close to my 6.8. That's not it though, that's another Silverbird game. There we go. Here's Scorpio. Yeah, very similar to my 6.8. They gave it 71%. Great playability and value for money make this another decent blaster for Silverbird. Can't really argue with that too much. Pretty good scores for the graphics. Sound was average, I would say. I think I said the same. Initially unwieldy players soon made less so with a collection of a few easy accessible Aquaglider upgrades. And yeah, the power-ups were pretty easy to get on there. And as you can see there, they agree with me, very R-Type influenced. R-Type goes subaquatic in Scorpio. Reviewer comments say Scorpio follows very much in the R-Type vein, only differing in scenario and graphics. For the budget asking price, it's an admirable attempt. Doesn't get any points for originality, but it does earn credibility for playability, which is relatively high in comparison with similar games released at this price. So again, we're fairly in agreement between myself and ZZap and Lemon. Lemon rated it a little bit lower, but still, you know, anything between 6 and 7 I think was a fair rating for that game. Let's move on to the next game then, which was On Court Tennis, a re-release of an Activision game. I gave this a score of 5.6. Lemon users ranked it a little bit more highly than me, 7.2 from 39 votes. Loved this game, played it heaps. Had fun with this game, used to play it with my father. Oh, bless. Back in the day, I spent many an hour playing this, pretending I was Jimmy, John, Ivan or Bjorn. Best tennis game I've played on the Commodore 64. I'm not sure I'd agree with those comments, some of them, but there's another one saying this is the best tennis game ever. So let's move on to the ZZap review. And the original review of this game, when it was released at full price for £10.99 on cassette, is from issue 2, June 1985. And it's a very comprehensive review, got lots of colour screenshots, how to play the game as well to some extent, and it goes across 2 pages, and lots of different categorizations for the review score: presentation, originality, graphics, hookability, sound and lastability, and value for money, with an overall score of 80%, which I find a bit strange. If you go back to the previous page, you can see they actually gave this a sizzler for 80%. So clearly early on in the days of ZZap, they didn't necessarily use the 90% benchmark for giving the sizzler. So just to look at a couple of the review comments. Graphically, the game has some excellent touches, like the ball increasing in size it's thrown or hit high. Players' serves are superbly animated, but they look a little bit silly walking down the court. That's something I definitely said about the game when I was playing it. Sound is good. Crowd sounds are feeble. Proves to be an easier game to get into than the Great Match Point, as the computer does all the running and you only have to time the shots, which is one of my criticisms of it, really, was you didn't really have much control over where your player moved around. So it's also worth mentioning that there's a second review of this, which is a review of the budget version. That's from a lot later on. That's from December 87. Issue 32, and they gave it a slightly lower score, 75%. There's just a very small review here. Tennis simulations aren't that common these days. This is an Activision re-release, quite notable. Having said how close to the real thing this is, it's also just as difficult to play, and it can be infuriating when, for instance, the ball bounces under your racket. Sports fans should give this a look, but I think the gameplay might well prove a little bit too frustrating for the average user. And yeah, I'd agree with that. It was quite frustrating to play, difficult to time your shots. But overall they gave it a higher score than I did, as did Lemon. So they were giving it sort of 70 to 80%. I only gave it 5.6, so a bit of a difference of opinion there. I think it just didn't age particularly well, this game, at the time. If you played it, I think you would have been a fan, but perhaps not so much playing it, you know, sort of 35 years later or whatever. So let's move on to the next game, which was Thrust 2. And I gave this game 5.7. Lemon users were even less impressed than that. They gave it 4.6. Comments like, they really like the first Thrust game and this doesn't make me sad either. Okay, well they liked it then. A very disappointing sequel, only the psychedelic title screen is unforgettable. Unlike the original Thrust, this game is complete crap. I wouldn't go quite that far, but it's definitely not as good as the original. Let's take a look at the ZZap review. And on the left hand side there you can see the review for Thrust 2, but on the right hand side you'll spot another game that I've reviewed recently, so we'll move on to that in a second. So score they gave it was 59%, which is very similar to my 5.7. The title screen makes you think you're in for something special. Unfortunately, gameplay fails to meet the promise. The graphics vary from gaudy, jerkily scrolling backdrops to some well animated and conceived sprites. The sound is well above average. I didn't agree with that at all. I didn't think the sound was that good, really. Thrust 2 is quite good, but not half as good as the original. And Julian Rignall's comments: as a hardened Thrust veteran, I was interested to see how this sequel would turn out. I'm sad to say that what Firebird has produced is something of a disappointment. I think that's fair. It was nowhere near as good as the first game and definitely had some problems with the physics of it in particular. But similar scores for me in terms of graphics and sound, playability, all pretty much the same as what I said, with an overall score that's pretty much identical to what I gave it as well. So we'll come back to that page in a second. Let's take a look at Brainstorm next. Since it's on this page, there's no point going back to this later. So Brainstorm was a game I reviewed just a couple of weeks ago, and I gave it a score of 7. Lemon users have given it 6.5. Such a brilliant game. I think this game is a little bit better than its average score of 5.9, which was obviously at that point in time, and I would agree with that. This came free with a magazine. I mentioned that it came with computer and video games, and it's better than most of the games that had to be paid for. Graphics are basic and sound is non-existent, but that doesn't matter with a game like this. It's addictive and that's what counts. Couldn't agree more with that. That's perfectly what I would agree with. A simple but very clever idea. So let's move on to the ZZap score, and they gave it, as we've seen on that page already, 94%, which is quite a resounding high score. Didn't seem to be giving the silver medals out at this point for budget games, but would have got one if they'd been doing that at this point. As you can see, presentation is excellent, like I said. Graphics and sound pretty basic, but the hookability and lastability, therefore the playability, were really high, and they gave it an overall score of 94%. As I said, not sure I'd quite rate it that highly, but there's no doubt it was a good game. Like Zolix, the concept is both very simple and fiendishly addictive. Trapping a bouncing ball with 3 lines sounds easy, but it comes incredibly hard on later screens. Graphics and sound are only functional. What exists is just game, and it's amazing. So yeah, couldn't agree more with those reviewer comments either. Never got as far as seeing this screen. That's an interesting looking one. So let's move on to the next game. Not much more to say about Brainstorm. So we'll move on to Slimy's Mine, which I gave a score of 7.3. And the Lemon users, a little bit higher than me, they gave it 8 out of 10. Frantic, chaotic, noisy, and lots of fun. Yeah, can't argue with that. What a cracking game. No, I've no idea what's going on, but that's part of its charm. Graphics are nice, sound is jaw-dropping, and it plays like a bizarre amalgam of Robotron and Pac-Man. Interesting. I would have probably said more like Robotron and Berserk, but fair enough. So let's move on to the ZZap score, which was in issue 41, and they gave it a full page review, and they gave it 94%. A funny, unusual and addictive shoot 'em up enhanced by brilliant presentation and sound. Buy it. Remember, this was a $2.99 game, but they're certainly not arguing that it was good value for money. Lots of good review comments as well. The thing that struck me first about Slimy's Mine was the multitude of strange samples strewn throughout the game. A hectic bout of shoot-'em-up action is backed by screams and cries, belches and brief comments, all of which caused consternation and amusement to the casual passerby. Not that we get many of those. This guy's gone off on a bit of a tangent here, but I do agree with those comments about the samples being really good. Another one here saying this must be one of the funniest games I've played. It's brilliant. The combination of cute froggy creatures, some extremely silly sound effects, and frenetic shoot 'em up action kept me coming back for more. And the final reviewer comment here includes, even though the final objective appears rather obscure, Slimy's Mine is instantly playable and very hard to put down. This little gem more than compensates for the disappointing other releases from Silverbird this month. We'll no doubt see those on a future set of comparison reviews. And as you can see, this one got the silver medal. Obviously they've started doing them by this point. So there you go, nice review for Slimy's Mine from ZZap, and I didn't rate it quite as highly as they did, but I don't disagree that it was a good game. So let's move on to the next review I did, which was Train Robbers. And Train Robbers got a score of 7.7 from the Lemon 64 reviews. I gave it 7 out of 10. A lot of charm and originality for a game of its time. The trick is figuring out what to do and how to progress your way onto the train and then down the carriages. Well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. Any other interesting comments? Very creative and original when compared to most other games of its time. Game in the Kane 2 style, average graphics but great hubbard sound and music. Gets rather repeating and boring after a while. A really good game. The ways you get killed are really funny, especially if you get hit by a tunnel. Very well done game. So yeah, lots of people liked that. And let's move over to the ZZap score. They gave it 90% in issue 38. Ignore the plain dull and blocky graphics. It's infuriatingly compulsive to play. The action is just tricky enough to allow gradual progress and just frustrating enough to be addictive. I would say that's fairly accurate. Through its many touches of slightly sick humour, Train Robbers recreates a superb feeling of watching a slapstick cartoon starring a spectacularly inept outlaw. Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Let's just go through some of the review scores. They give it high score for presentation. I think it was pretty average for presentation. Graphics, I think they've been a little bit harsh on. I think they're quite charming, the graphics. And the sounds, again, they've gone pretty average with them, but I think they were pretty good for this type of game. I think they suited the game perfectly. The playability scores are quite high as well, as you can see, which resulted in the overall 90% rating. So another silver medal. That's 3 good game reviews in a row from the games we've been looking at. All rated a bit higher than I did, but I think that's more down to the problems with my rating system than anything else. So let's move on to the next review, which was Sea-Base Delta. This was rated quite low by myself, as I gave it a score of 4.2, but I did make it clear in my review that my review criteria for things like graphics and sound don't really apply to a text adventure. I actually thought it was a pretty decent text adventure, even though I'm not a fan of that kind of game. Lemon users have rated it 6.8. I'm not going to go through the comments there. Let's just have a look at one quickly. Top game and a classic example of the genre. Problems not too taxing. Nice atmosphere. If you like adventures, give it a go. So moving on to the ZZap score. Obviously this was reviewed in their text adventure section, so the review criteria are a little bit different. So let's just move down to the scores. You can see they rated it on atmosphere, interaction, lastability and value for money, and gave an overall score of 85%. Let's not go through the review too much, but let's just say that if you can accept the idea of a simpler game that won't take you months to solve, then this particular example definitely belongs in your collection. Neatly presented, neatly programmed, and although it doesn't offer a massive number of locations, it's lots of fun. So they certainly rated it highly as a budget price text adventure. Just 2 more games to go then, and the next one was not a particularly highly regarded one, Hopper Copper. So I gave this a score of 4.7. and the Lemon users tend to agree with me there. They give it a score of 4.3, so pretty close to mine. There's a few comments there. I could never figure out my bearings to get to the various crimes on certain roads. I stumbled on them randomly. I think that's a fair thing to say. Strange idea for a game. Did have a couple of hours of fun way back then. Pretty tame stuff though. Yeah, very tame, I would say. So let's move on to the ZZap score. Now it does say here that it was 21%, which is very low, but if you look at the actual review section here with the scores, they're actually missing the overall score. It's got cut off by some mistake. Whether that's because they overlaid the image of the game on it, I'm not sure. So I'm classing it as having a score of 21%, but it may actually have been a little bit higher or possibly a little bit lower, or about the same. Based on the other scores, I'm guessing they would have only given it about 30% at most. Comments wise, they've definitely been running out of ideas down at Prune Software headquarters. I mean, a policeman on an Astro Hopper. They must really have been scraping the barrel when they came up with that. So another comment here, hello, looks like we've got a bit of a turkey here and not one you'd be carving up on your dinner table either. So yeah, pretty much they're not happy with it. I wasn't happy with it either. It's a pretty poor game, even though there were a couple of aspects that weren't too bad. The music was okay and the graphics weren't too bad, but the playability was very poor. And it seemed a little bit glitchy and unfinished as well. So let's move on to the final game from this set of reviews, which was Harvey Headbanger, another game beginning with H. I gave this a score of 7.3. Bit of a difference of opinion with the Lemon users. They've gone with 4.8. Had no idea what to do, so didn't play it much. I hated this. Thankfully it was on Chartbusters, so I could ignore it easily. That's a reference to Chartbusters, the 20 game compilation, which features a lot of Firebird and Mastertronic games. Actually, a compilation I had when I was a kid, where I played a lot of the games that I'm familiar with from this series and the Mastertronic one that I did a few years ago. What the hell was this all about? I think I played it for 5 minutes and then never loaded it again. Clearly a lot of people didn't understand what you were supposed to do in the game. But if we move on to the ZZap review, they gave it very similar score to me. I gave it 7.3, they gave it 73%. Not a very nice looking review. It's all in black and white, even though you can quite clearly see there's some colour on the left hand side. That's a game that we'll be seeing later in this series as it happens. This is nice, but it doesn't really work in one player mode. The 2-player game is a lot more entertaining and provides plenty of laughs. Graphically and orally, this is not outstanding, but it's all quite bright, bold and jolly. Priced right at £2, and that's what I said too. It's a decent budget game and something a little bit different from the very high number of shoot 'em ups and platform games and things like that. Sensibly priced for what's on offer. Initially highly entertaining, but the fun wanes without a second player. Jolly tune and some suitable spot effects. Nothing special on the graphics. So overall I think they're pretty much in close agreement with myself. So let's round off the reviews there. So just one last thing to do, as I've done in the previous videos of this type, and that's to compare all the scores and the rankings of the 10 games side by side. So you can see there's some pretty close similarities firstly across all three of the different mediums for review. That's mine, Zap and Lemon. We all agreed that Slimy's Mine was top. Actually I've got it tied with Harvey Headbanger and Zap's got it tied with Brainstorm, but it's come out at the top for some reason when I've sorted the list anyway. From there on there's a few differences, but actually I think the rankings are quite close across the three. So Hopper Copper's right near the bottom as you'd expect, as is Thrust 2. Harvey Headbanger's all over the place actually. I've got it ranked quite highly, whereas Lemon's got it quite low, and Zap, actually the Zap scores are quite high across the board apart from Hopper Copper and Thrust 2. So they're all quite closely grouped together. But BMX Kids is up there as well. Scorpio is kind of in the middle. Train Robbers is up there. Lemon's got it second. Zap's got it third. I've got it fourth. Brainstorm, again, I've got three games that are tied here. BMX Kids, Train Robbers and Brainstorm. Could be in any order. And if you look in similar sort of positions on the Zap list and again on the Lemon list, they're all kind of there and thereabouts. The only real one that's varied is Seabase Delta, where Zap and Lemon have got it quite high and I've got it down at the bottom, but I've already explained why that is. On court tennis, I've got it ranked quite low, whereas Lemon's got it quite high, Zap's got it sort of in the middle. So yeah, generally some consistency for the most part between what we ranked high and what we ranked low. Just a bit of difference in a few of them. And then just to finish off, finally, let's take a look at the average. And my average was 6.26, Lemon's was 6.28, so almost exactly the same, despite there being some difference of opinion on some of the games. But Zap, as I mentioned, really rated a lot of these games quite highly. You've got 3 rated at 90 or over, and then another 4 or 5 rated at over 70. So they really did rate this particular batch of games quite highly, apart from Thrust 2 and Hopper Copper, which is rightly so, I might add. So that's it for this comparison of reviews between myself and Zap and Lemon. Hope you've enjoyed watching it. Let me know in the comments if you agree with these assessments from the different sources. And I'll be back with another Silverbird game review in the fairly near future. But actually my next video is going to be something a little bit different and perhaps something you're not expecting. So tune in for that pretty soon. And I'll see you again soon in my next video.